Way of the Peaceful Warrior, book versus movie, next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, welcome to another podcast edition of Retro Serial. I'm glad you could be joining me while today we talk about book versus movie, and the book we're going to be talking about is Way of the Peaceful Warrior and the movie is Peaceful Warrior, and I'm going to talk all about that again with my good friend Thrash Pondo Pons. But before we get to the discussion, would you do me the honor of going ahead and hitting the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification if you want to know when these things are available, and please share this on your favorite social media. And that's all if you're listening to this on YouTube or watching it on YouTube. If you're listening to this on podcasts, please do me the honor of writing a review and giving me a rating, and share it on your favorite social media. All those things mean the world to me. If you want to go a step further and donate to the channel, you're welcome to follow the link below to the Patreon page, where you'll find two levels of support. There's our Cornflake Club, which is $3 a month. It's kind of a no frills, just, hey, we like what you're doing, and we want to be part of that no sugar Cornflake Club cereal club. And if you want to go beyond that, there's $5 a month to be part of our Honeycomb Hideout. And with the Honeycomb Hideout, you get most all videos and most all podcasts a day early. There are a couple of exceptions. So, for example, if a celebrity dies and I want to comment on it, you're not going to get that one a day early. With all that said, let's go ahead and jump straight into the podcast. All right, everyone, we already did an introduction here. You know what this show is about. We are going to be talking about our book versus movie. And this is long awaited for me because it's book versus movie in regards to Way of the Peaceful Warrior was the name of the book. And then the name of the movie was Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. I have with me Thrash Pondo. How you doing?
Hey, as great as always.
Well, good.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, you sound excellent. Well, I kind of just want to jump into it, but I kind of have a couple preliminary questions and a preliminary story of my own. I do have to let people know that, the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior was written by Dan Millman and it came out in 1980. And then the movie Peaceful Warrior, which I had been waiting to come out for a long time, came out in, do you remember when it came out? It was like 2003 or 2000.
I was early 2000s, 2003 jumped into my head. So I'd say go with that.
Yeah, maybe. For some reason, that 2003 and 2006 are both kind of popping into my head. These are things I should know before I jump on here. But, it really is the substance of it. Now, I have to say that I was introduced to The Way of the Peaceful Warrior because it was on my recommended reading list when I was in martial arts when I was a kid. And I was in this system called the White Dragon Martial Arts System. And it had, Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance and a bunch of other stuff, And at one time it was required reading, but they kind of laxed off on it. But for some reason, I got a hold of Way of the Peaceful Warrior and I read it. And I remember seeing it earlier too. There was a New Age bookstore in my town at one time. And this was late 80s. This was like 87, 88. And the guy that ran the New Age bookstore was actually a martial arts instructor too. But I remember seeing the cover of it, Way of the Peaceful Warrior in his bookstore. And so I got to read that at a kind of a young age. I think I saw it. I saw it like 87, but I didn't read it until like 89, somewhere around there, because I was around 16, 17 when I had read the book, and it was pretty impactful on me. I have to say, other than the Bible, it's been one of the more impactful books on my life. And so I read the book about once every 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years, I find myself coming back to it. So I have I know I'm normally the movie guy, but in this one, I'm a book guy because it was just one of them that I've read. But for you, when were you kind of introduced to the book, and tell me a little bit about it?
Full disclosure, I was introduced to it through you.
Oh,
I
okay.
had actually never heard of the book or the movie prior to you pitching it to me. And I believe it was actually one of our, I mean, you may have been thinking about it for some time before, but one of our posters made a suggestion to it. And I remember you said, oh, it's in the works. But I had too much familiarity with it prior to our discussion of it.
Prior to us starting this podcast and doing book versus movie, pull your earpiece down just a little tad
Little bit.
further. There we
How's
go.
that better?
It's a little better. It wasn't
Good.
bad before, but I mean, that's just a little bit better.
I'm afraid I'm gonna get the Darth Vader thing that
No,
you know.
I'd rather
You got
deal
it.
with that and hear you than not hear you. And we just got your setup too. You know what I mean? We just got you all
Exactly,
set up.
exactly. With the new
sounding
microphone,
good.
new camera. So as long as you can hear me now, you can hear me good now.
Yeah, I can hear you good now. Well, so you were just barely introduced to it. What did you think as you read the book? Let's just start there. What were your thoughts?
Well,
Did you read the book first, or did you see the movie?
oh, I definitely read the book first. I always try to do that. I always try to get the author's vision first before the screenplay writer's vision of it.
Yeah.
So I read the book first, and I went into it with an open mind. Full disclosure, self-help books has never been high on my list of reads. I even made a joke about it, one of my top 10 lists. And it's not to say I don't need self-discipline. It's been an ongoing battle in my life. But I always find sometimes other people's strategies for self-discipline don't necessarily fit mine. So my father and I have talked about that at some length. My father actually has done public speaking and done the self-help circuit, I guess you'd say.
Oh, really? I'd love to hear more about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, certainly. Never actually met Mr. Dillman, but is familiar with his work, and he full-heartedly says he identifies with a lot of his ideals. But I went into it open-minded, and I actually loved the way it was approached.
Yeah.
Here's a young man at a very, shall we say, insecure time of his life. But the big thing is he's having these ongoing nightmares and is plagued by this demon. And that's the opening. He's not some like pampered jock who we're going to have a real tough time identifying with. He's a guy with neuroses and insecurities. And it starts off making him very, very, very approachable. So as I read the book, I mean, I did do athletics in high school. I was never particularly great at it, but I did play football and did do some other sports. So I was never quite to the same level, but I did empathize with the young man. And so his hero's journey kind of caught me along. And I don't want to go too far into it because I'm sure you have more you want to say about the intro. But I was in it with both feet, basically from the first chapter.
Well, good. Yeah, I mean, I want to kind of lay out the story of the book, and then we'll contrast it with the story of the movie and talk about those differences. But as you were talking about this hero's journey, he starts it just kind of like, I think, at a pretty identifiable level where we've all experienced what he experiences. He's got some things going for him, even and even in that he might be a little bit more advanced than maybe the average person, because he's like a gymnast. I can't remember if he's an Olympic gymnast or not, but he's a pretty well-known gymnast. And by the way, the story is a mixture of true elements of his life and fantasy. So
it grays. You're not quite sure which is the fantasy and which is the actual. You can pretty much sort it out, but I like the fact that it's ambiguous.
Yeah. He presents it as kind of like a true story. Obviously, there's some embellishments that we can get into, but just so you know, Dan Millman's a real person, and he's the subject of the story, and it's about his life. But it starts in a place that we kind of all been there, like kind of like an angst. What do I do with my life? What am I doing? And even even if you have something, substantial in your life, something going on like he did with his gymnastics career, you can still feel that kind of void. You can still feel that kind of emptiness. Like, what is this life about? What am I doing uh, with what's going on? He in the beginning is really an attempt to ignore that voice in his head and suppress it, but it keeps coming up in these in the dreams that he has, and that kind of comes through particularly in the movie. But the book really is about the fact that he meets this mentor that he calls Socrates, and the way he meets him is very interesting because he's up at in the wee hours of the morning, can't sleep. He goes into a convenience shop, and this is back in the 1960s, and this is in Berkeley. And he goes into this shop, and he meets Socrates there, and he was looking for a soda, and Socrates says, "We don't have any soda." And don't call me Pop, because he says, "Can I get a soda, Pop?" And he says, "Oh," he says, and anyway, but anyway, says all we have is juice. It's kind of like a precursor to these health food stores or something like that, it seems like. And as he goes outside and he's walking across the street after he buys his juice, um, Socrates comes out of the store because it's kind of the wee hours in the morning, and stands there and looks at him. And then he turns around to look back at him, and he's on the roof. So in a matter of the time it takes him to walk basically across the street, he gets across the street, the guy follows him out, or he goes out of the door, the guy follows him out, and I think he's sitting in a chair. He walks across the street, and I can tell when somebody's looking at you, and you look back, and he looks back, and he's on the roof.
There, he's up here. Yeah.
Yeah. And from there, it starts his journey of learning from this guy. And basically the ideas that he learns from him are ideas of kind of like I would call it like a modern Buddhism, like maybe like an unstrict Buddhism. Although, he has to go through this fast and all this stuff, but the movie spans this guy's entire life. He goes through all these trials, and he goes through all these trainings and things like that, which border on martial arts and also border on like gymnastics and calisthenics and just more flexibility and stuff like that. And a lot of new age stuff, a lot of like visions and things like that, and remote viewing and things that, if you know about kind of new age stuff. But the philosophy is that of like more of like being present in the moment and realizing that this moment is all you have. A lot of stuff on breathing. I've been doing, as a result of that book, I've done a lot of deep breathing work over the course of my life, and I attribute a lot of my success to that, because and a lot of my just general health to the fact that I have been constantly in a like a deep breathing kind of pattern that I do. Anything else you want to add to the story of the book before we get into kind of the differences? Because I know we're going to explore some of the differences when we get into the movie as well.
Oh, yes.
But, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, as you said, it's really more of a identity crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, it manifests itself with these demons and these nightmares that he's having. But what he's doing is it's all based on his uncertainty. And it's funny, it's something that it seems all young men go through, particularly ones that actually have what appears to be good futures in front of them. People think, oh yeah, the rich kids got it easy. Well, not necessarily, because there's way more expected to them. They're going to these Ivy League schools. They're getting all these opportunities that other kids don't. And what are you going to do with these gifts? And I think he kind of had that. I think he was like, oh my God, I have this like fast track to success, and I have no idea on how to wield it.
Yeah.
And so Socrates, not Pop, Socrates becomes his, I don't want to say alter ego, but the tool that he uses to sort of hone these thoughts and help him focus and, as you say, live in the moment, which is really, it's an ongoing theme in both the book and movie, is that you cannot think of life in terms of a finish line. The only finish line is when they bury you.
Right.
What you have are these moments here, and I think that was ultimately the thing that he needed to learn the most.
Yeah, and the book really covers like a long period of time. I mean, when he meets Socrates at the end of the book in the cave, and then he basically, the end of the book is he deals with his own mortality, where he basically goes through this death experience, and at the end of this death experience, there's this uncontrollable laughter. And it's kind of a life is absurd kind of moment. I don't know. That's how I would look at it anyway. I don't know if you would look at it any differently.
I always liked the idea that it was sort of, and I actually went back and reread that chapter just in case I missed something. And one of the things I got was almost a Greek philosophy. Thank you, Socrates. Idea that when you pass on, you learn the great secret, and perhaps the great secret is funny. But I'd like to think that it's not dark and dismal at the end, but I think that's what they were trying to say is when it's all over, we'll all have a good laugh.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what could be a better epithet than that?
Yeah. For me, from coming from a different kind of worldview, for me, that's kind of where it broke down. I mean, I liked pretty much all the stuff in between about being in the present and really being thankful of what's going on now in the reality. But I did see kind of, how would I say it? I mean, almost like this is the best that you're going to get, kind of a thing without, and I know I said I'm not going to be religious in this, but I can't help it. I mean, I have that worldview outside of Christian worldview, this is the best you're going to get is just being able to laugh at everything. So for me, that's kind of where I'm like, okay, I agreed with a lot of the points up till then. And at that point, I can say that's a different worldview. And I think that's the best that worldview has to offer you. But the big deal was, and the whole reason I brought it up is that it really kind of spans like a large period of this guy's life. And Dad Millman's not dead, by the way. He still does podcasts and stuff. And he does, so it really is. And he doesn't
with
actually,
his wife Joy.
Yeah. And he doesn't actually die in the book. He just has a death experience in the book, like a death vision kind of in the book.
A spiritual death, you might call it.
Right. But the book is literally like years, years and years. And this is one of the biggest differences between the book and the movie. The movie is really like maybe a few years of his life, maybe his college experience. Take us into the book. Tell kind of explain the movie. Rash Pondo, tell us about the movie. Give us give us a basic storyline of the movie.
Well, it starts fundamentally as the book does, and that's the good news. It starts with him having a nightmare, and he goes out for a jug to kind of clear his mind, and he finds the gas station, and things kind of split from there. Elephant in the room. They have Nick Nolte play Socrates in the movie.
Right.
And Nick Nolte could not have looked less than I pictured Socrates. I pictured him yes. Okay. I pictured more of a James Hong type fellow. Probably best known as, remember that very funny episode of Seinfeld? He's the maitre d' in the Chinese restaurant who keeps saying Carson.
Okay. Yeah.
Carson.
Yeah.
He's been around forever, done a number of things. He started out doing science fiction in the 60s. But that's how I pictured Socrates. I pictured him as Asian. And Nick Nolte is many things. He's a great actor. I've been a fan of his for many years, but he's not Asian. So it was a challenge getting me to accept him as Socrates. And it's a similar situation. Here's a young man who thinks that success and happiness will come from achievement. And if he can get on this, he's a collegiate gymnast, but he's not Olympic yet. He hasn't made the Olympic team. And he thinks that if he could make this Olympic team, he'll be happy if he gets his way. And effectively, Nick Nolte says, no, happiness in this world is not based on achievements. It's based on living a happy life. And if you listen to me, I will illustrate this to you.
Right.
And most of the movie is him sort of, I don't want to say begrudgingly. Begrudgingly is the wrong word, but
I mean, it's a Luke Skywalker, Yoda kind of mentor-mentee relationship.
It is. It's a challenge for him to follow Socrates and follow Socrates' way, even though ultimately, as even the viewers know, it's going to be the right way. This is going to be how he finds success. And one thing we've glossed over, and this actually did happen to Mr. Millman, he was very, very seriously injured in a motorcycle accident.
Right.
Almost losing his leg. And no one ever thought he'd be able to compete again, ever, let alone go Olympic. And I don't want to give any spoilers away, but let's just say...
Spoiler. Yeah, well, I mean, this is a spoiler one.
He manages to achieve greatness in spite of this horrific injury, and in many ways through the help of his mentor Socrates.
Right. Yeah. Boy, there's so much that could be said about either the book or the movie that it's kind of difficult to know where to start. I think that so first of all, let me just say this. Let me start off with the movie, that I was excited when I saw the previews of the movie, because being a big fan of the book for so long, I remember seeing it was at the beginning of another movie. You know how they play trailers at the beginning of another
Coming
movie.
Attractions.
Yeah, Coming Attractions. And it was on, and I was watching it at home on a DVD. And, you know, and I'm not really paying attention to the TV. I'm talking because I'm waiting for the movie we got to start. And it may have even been, no, I'm pretty sure it was on DVD by then. It wasn't VHS that I saw the Coming Attraction for it. But, you know, I wasn't paying attention, but I looked and I just saw the picture of Nick Nolte on the roof and the guy looking back at him and go, you know, and that I was just like, oh my gosh, is that movie? Is that going to be a movie? Because I, you know, like I said, being a big fan of the book, I was like excited. The Nick Nolte part didn't kind of throw me because I had been a fan of the book for years. I've seen like publications and writings and stuff on it. And he wasn't, you know, he was never meant to be Asian. He was actually meant to be American. In every there, you know, Dan Millman's kind of written more than just that book. He's written like an Adventures of Socrates book, and if you look at the cover of that, he's definitely not an Asian person. So that didn't throw me quite as much. But I could see why.
It's the way I envisioned him. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
But so. The movie is really kind of a short synopsis of the book, and the big hurdle in the movie, or I should say the pronounced hurdle in the movie, the pronounced hurdle is the broken leg that he experiences on the motorcycle accident. I mean, from the very beginning, that's foreshadowed, because he in the movie, he's got, you know, he wakes up from this dream where he breaks his leg. And then he sees Socrates, and then, you know, and so that's kind of like because in a movie, you kind of have you introduce the characters, you put them in a bad situation, you resolve the situation. And so the characters are, you know, Dan Millman and Socrates and Joy, and the bad situation is, and his friends, and the bad situation is he breaks his leg, and then he overcomes this. There are lessons in both the book and the movie that are, you know, two sides of the same coin. Should I say that makes sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yes,
but they do express the same ideas behind them. So, one idea that was in the book, that was in the movie, that was not in the book, that I really liked, was, so, you know, Dan Millman's learning all these lessons about being present and not being attached and all this stuff and giving up. And finally, he thinks that his dream is taken away from him, being an Olympic gymnast. And Socrates has the Olympic one that he does is the rings, you know, the rings. That's his deal. So he's given that up, and he's come to peace with that. Dan Millman's kind of come to peace with that in the book, or in the movie. I keep saying the book, sorry, in the movie. And in the movie, Socrates sets up rings, and he says, do the rings. And he's just like, I've given all that up and stuff. And there's one line that's in the movie that's not in the book that really speaks to me. And that is Socrates tell him, a warrior does what he loves because he loves it, not because of the accomplishment of it. Now that's sentiments in the book, but the actual statements there. So he makes him do the ring stuff, even if he never goes to it. He does it because he loves to do it, not because he's going to win a medal or anything like that. So that's one of the differences. For you, what were some of the big differences between? I can go on a lot of the differences between the book and the movie. What are some of the differences for you?
Well, there's one thing I have to say when I saw the movie, and again, spoilers, that differed gravely from the book. And it wasn't just the fact that the book goes on for about another 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a whole other life after this. Long story short, he goes to the Olympics and he achieves. And the weird thing is, in the end of the movie, it was almost like after giving us this non-traditional hero's journey all the way through, they say, let's end it on a Hollywood ending. So here he is, he's waiting to go up, and one of his friends is sitting next to him, and his friend blurts out all his own anxieties, which mirror perfectly what Mr. Dillman's anxieties were at the beginning of the movie. So almost like it's a recap for those of you who haven't been paying attention since the beginning. And then Dillman goes out there, and it's that sort of da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da, and he does his routine, and he wins, and it ends, boom, right there. And there's that little black and white blurb at the end about how he's still happily living in California with his wife, Joy. And it makes it seem as though that's the end of his journey, when the whole point of the book is that whether he achieves here or not, that's not the end. He's going to have a whole life afterwards, and he does. And I thought the movie could have done a little bit better job depicting that. But as I said, I think they wanted to give it that Hollywood ending, with
a real dramatic type of
ending. But I thought that took away from Mr. Dillman's message and his own personal journey.
That what's interesting is I first saw the movie when it came out, and I bought the DVD, and the DVD had all kinds of extras and interviews with Dan Millman, and Dan Millman basically did say that, this deals with only one small part of my life, where the book deals with a larger portion of my life. But he was reasonably satisfied with it. And apparently there had been like several scripts that were written that got turned down.
I believe it. It's a tough nut to crack when you read the book. It really is.
And of course you have to kind of, let things go when it comes to a movie. I mean, that's just really all there is to it. I mean, we just did a thing on Dune again, and really, I mean, what are you going to say about Dune? I mean, you just, even this new movie that's one half of it and 2.5 hours long, still only scratches the surface of the book.
It's a compromise. You have to compromise when you make a film.
Right.
And, a film from a novel specifically, I should say.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know that one of the bigger differences too was in the book, his thinking place that he had to go to when he got kind of his time out was a rock, and in the movie it was that old broken down car he said on it was kind of a classic car or something like that, and it's a little bit more visually appealing, but basically he's like, whenever Socrates kind of wants to put him in a timeout, he goes, go to the rock and sit on the rock and think of something until you can, so this is kind of like his place where he has to sit and do his timeout. And And in the book, it's just kind of this rock that he has to sit on, but that's not very visually appealing. But in the movie, it's a car, and
Which makes sense because Socrates' headquarters is in a gas station. It's
yes,
also it's a nice homage I felt to an earlier work of a hero's journey, the Karate Kid.
oh
Because remember,
yeah,
Mr. Miyagi has all the vintage cars, and Daniel San works on the cars. And I thought, while the two works are very, very different, and Dillman's work actually predates the Karate Kid by a good, I want to say, 15 years, I thought it was a nice little homage
yeah.
to that other work.
Well, I don't know, you know, not his work. The experience does, because the experience is in the late '60s, but the book came out in 1980, as I believe.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. You're right. You're right.
yeah, and Karate Kid came out in '84, but still, it
Fours.
predates it for sure. I'm not sure the Karate Kid was necessarily stealing from it though, but I don't know. Who
No,
knows?
more like, as I say, more of an homage or
Yeah,
a tribute. There are many stories of the hero's journey. You were
yeah,
mentioning Star Wars earlier. There's plenty of them, and they all have very similar elements.
yeah, for sure. Um, well, one of the big differences, and I'll bring it up, but I'll let you riff on it a little bit, and that is the role of joy in the book is significantly different
Yes.
than in the book. So why don't you talk about that for a little bit, about the differences in the book and the movie between the character of Joy, or Joyce, actually.
Well, and I did wonder about that. In the book, she has a very significant part. She's almost like a co-mentor, or
Mhm.
how should I put this? If it was, she's a student of Socrates as well, but a higher student. She's got
Mhm.
a few legs up on him, uh, Mr. Dillman. So what she's doing is she's still training, but helping him as a junior partner along. In the movie, she's just a girl who friend zones him. It's a much, much less
Yeah.
well written character in the
Mhm.
movie. And I had to wonder, because bear in mind, as we've discussed, was Socrates in any way a real person, or was he totally Dan Millman's alter ego, his inner voice, which drove him to greatness? I'd like to think somewhere between the two. I'd like to think he actually had a mentor
Well,
along the way.
no, the guy that he calls Socrates was a real person.
Really? Okay.
Yes, yeah,
Could
it
he astro
was.
project?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, you got to think it was the '60s, and so they did all those kind of, like, astral projection and new age kind of resurgence of dawning of the age of Aquarius
There he
kind
is.
of
They did
craft.
acid, is what you meant to say.
Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if they did acid, but they did.
Yeah.
Those were all those
Yeah.
practices that were kind of going on
Gotcha.
back then. And
Gotcha.
in 1980, there was this huge resurgent. Well, late 70s and 80s, there was a huge resurgence of Eastern thought and mysticism known as the New Age movement. I don't
Mhm.
know if you ever heard of. Did you ever get into that or hear anything about it or whatever?
My mom did.
Oh, did she? Yeah.
With varying degrees of success.
Crystals and all that stuff. And so it was really popular to kind of
Mhm.
without a kind of almost in a postmodern way, revisit some of these Eastern thoughts, not knowing that a lot of these Eastern thoughts, by the way, kind of contradict each other. But it was more of just kind of like, well, if Buddhism works for you, that's great, but Hinduism works for me. And then thoughts about reincarnation and all this stuff were kind of like almost stripped out of their historic context, and just kind of like, well, I like to think of it like this kind of a thing. So
You have hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what Western civilization does. It cherry picks good ideas from every other civilization and just sort of mashes them together in an amalgam.
yeah.
Again, with varying degrees of success. And that is
Well, that's what postmodernism is, by the way. I mean, a good example of, you want to know a good example of postmodernism is go to Vegas. Vegas, you have the pyramids
Mhm.
next to the Statue of Liberty. These are miniatures of each other, but not understanding that there was a context in which the pyramids were developed and a context in which the Statue of Liberty was developed. And yeah, postmodernism is the attempt to kind of pull those out and not really understand the background. But that's what happened in the New Age movement. The New Age movement didn't really realize that there was a huge difference between, say, Hinduism and Buddhism. They're not like two of the same thing. They're actually very, very different. Different. But that was, and the book's kind of like that. It's an amalgamation. It's like Buddhism, but not strict historic Buddhism,
Well, there's that great line in Enemy Mine. I don't want to get too far off topic, but there's one that has always stayed with me. The Louis Gossett Jr. character, when they're talking about spirituality, and he says, well, our guy, Mickey Mouse, said this. And Louis Gossett says, of course he did, because it's truth. And I think what happens is we get stuck in our head that enlightened people will all be enlightened, and that's good, but that enlightened people will all somehow agree and be on the same page. And that's not necessarily true. There are, shall we say, other truths. And I don't want to get too ethereal here.
Yeah, I get
but
it.
I think that is what happened with the New Age movement. I think
that's what happens with a lot of movements. But the New Age movement was particularly centered around kind of more Eastern thought having a resurgent thing. Yeah. We'll talk offline about truths. It depends. It kind of highly depends on what one means by that. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. We'll center it back.
I have a question on now that you said that Socrates was actually, at least in some format, a real person. Was Joy his niece, or was Joy another student of his? Or do you know?
Well, Joy ends up being his wife
in the book, in reality. But as far as Joy's context to Socrates,
I don't know. Okay. And I've heard a lot of interviews with Dan Millman, and because I'm a fan of the book, so I've listened to a lot of, which is weird because I've only read that one book. I haven't read The Adventures of Socrates or his other books or anything like that. But I've listened to a lot of his podcast, a lot of, like, when he's on a podcast, I've listened to a lot of interviews with him, and I don't think, I don't think so. I don't remember exactly,
because I always found, at least in the book, there's supposed to be some connection between Joy and Socrates that we never actually see it. Perhaps there wasn't one. Perhaps he saw it. Perhaps he thought fate brought me to Socrates and fate brought me to Joy, and therefore there's some connection.
Yeah.
But I've always felt like Joy was somehow, again, another one of his students, one who ended up later on in her life falling in love with Dan.
Yeah. Well, and again, like you were saying, that Joy plays a much bigger role in the book than in the movie. In the movie, she's just a small part, but in the book, she's kind of like this middle piece that's like an extended mentor. But then he forgets her. Socrates puts a little, I don't know, energy into his brain and makes him totally forget who she is, and then he meets her again later as Joyce. Doesn't, right? He meets her again later as Joyce, and then she says, well, they used to call me Joy when I was young, and they realize that she was the same person. So, and at the time, Socrates makes him forget about through the his powers, because he's not ready for that. It would have been a train wreck in his opinion. A couple things. Well, obviously they have the in the book. They have, he goes on a fast for a week, in the book, which doesn't happen in the movie. Is there anything? Let me ask you this: is there anything that was in the book that you're glad didn't make it into the movie that kind of would have been, I don't know, unnecessary or anything like that?
That didn't make it into the movie.
Yeah, something you read in the book and then you watch the movie, obviously that there's a lot of stuff that's not in there, but there's something, but you're like, okay, well, I can part with that.
wouldn't say I was glad it didn't make it in, but there's a whole subplot about a chef who ends up passing on, and it's a nice little story, but it sort of detracts from his journey.
Yeah.
And when you're doing a hero's journey, you don't have too much stuff in it that has nothing to do with the hero's journey.
Right.
It's a distraction and a needless one. That's why hero's journeys are such great story arcs. There's very little which is superfluous. And so I can certainly see why they cut that.
I think that you hit the nail on the head with that one. Yeah. In the book, there's a chef who's like a vegetarian vegan chef almost. And that actually corresponds with the whole him going on a week-long fast in the book.
Yes, it does.
Because they go to this guy's restaurant, and he knows Socrates, and and he makes him this beautiful cantaloupe, I don't know, dish, and they eat it. And that's actually slightly referenced in the movie, but instead of that, Chef Joy makes that nice looking thing. Yes. I don't know if that's a homage to it or not, but then the guy's place burns down and he dies. And it's superfluous. It's could totally do without it. Were there any lessons in the book that didn't come out in the movie, you think?
Well, there was one thing that was done totally different in the movie, and it's with the development of Socrates' character. When you have someone who's a true mentor, a true master, a true sensei, whatever you want to refer to it, you always have to have, in my opinion, some scene where they actually bring something to the table, where we actually see just how truly amazing they really are. Mm-hmm. You don't really need it, but it makes a nice confirmation of our faith in this person that we've been giving on face value throughout the entire story. And in the book, when they have one of their little celebratory binges, they're set upon by three street toughs, and without even breaking a sweat, Socrates sort of boom, boom, bap, and they're all laying in the street with varying levels of consciousness, and he's actually trying to help one who he really hurt.
Yeah.
And so he takes all three of them out without Millman. I keep saying Dillman, Brad Dillman, Mr. Millman, even noticing what's going on. He takes all three of them out, incapacitates them, and then in the next breath goes to aid them because he doesn't want to kill them. He just wants to incapacitate them to
right, yeah,
save the two of them. And it's very, very well done in the book. In the movie, it's this comic relief passage where they end up,
he goes kind of more the Christ route in the movie, where
I can see that. Yes,
he just says,
cast thy bread upon thy waters.
Yeah, well, if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him your left also. If somebody asks you for your what is it, your tunic, give him your cloak also. So, and that's kind of what he does in the book. Now they do kind of go, well, hey, he goes, you need a watch. Yeah. My friend here's got a watch.
It's real gold.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger differences, and you hit upon this because in the book, there is much more time devoted to the abilities of Socrates than in the movie. And it's really just only fairly hinted at when you could see him on the roof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At the very beginning, because, obviously he jumps on the roof. And in the book, there's much more attention given to who he is. It's still a mystery, and in both the book and the movie, there's a mystery, but there's much more attention given to, for example, Socrates is 80 something years old. Now he's not supposed to look that old. He's supposed to look, like a middle-aged kind of guy. But in the book, you find out that he's actually very, very old. He just has, I don't know, kept himself, part of his powers, I guess. And in the book, Dan is much more interested in trying to find out more about Socrates,
yes,
than in the movie.
He's far more curious in the book, and he's always questioning Joy about this and that, and even the chef, whose name eludes me, who was a former student of Socrates. He's trying to get information out of him too. He never gets it.
Mm-hmm.
We get his age and the fact that he was married at one point and his wife died long ago, and that's pretty much all we know about him. Well, a couple of the tidbits, but that's more speculation. But yes, you do see his abilities far more in the book than you do in the movie.
I was really kind of looking forward to seeing Socrates kick some butt. I was disappointing because I watched the movie and he handles these people, and then you watch you read the book, and in the book he handles these three thugs that come out and try to rob him. And in the and of course, being a martial artist, I wanted to see that. And in the movie, he just just kind of plays pacifist with them, basically.
Which works, but again, it's more of a comic relief than an actual confirmation of his ability. I was hoping for like a Mr. Miyagi scene. Yeah. Where he takes down the Cobra Kai dude, or remember that was it the sequel or the third one, where actually takes down the Cobra Kai sensei and the other sensei simultaneously, and I'm like, that is hardcore, I just getting to see a master trash a couple of bozos is always satisfying.
It really is. It really is. In the book too, he basically the idea that he's on the roof too, like when he goes back and he looks back and he's up on the roof, that whole thing was like Socrates tells him in this
no worries.
Socrates tells him in this, like, well, you needed to see something to get your attention. I would have got your attention if this didn't happen, if you didn't see something spectacular. And he kind of explores some things. There's a little bit of a Q&A in the book at one point between him and Socrates. He says, how can you know the future? And he says, because I know the present. And he says, if I know the present, I'm going to be able to predict the future, because it's pretty predictable if you know the present. If you have a really good understanding of the present. In the book, just to make a long story short, not to belabor the point, Socrates' powers and abilities is much more prevalent than in the movie. In the movie, it's just barely alluded to. Anyway, do you remember the lesson that Dan Millman came up with while he had to go sit in the car?
I don't. I knew you were going to ask me that too, and I must confess I don't.
There's one.
Can I guess?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Can I guess? If I remember correctly, and if it wasn't here, it was somewhere else in the book or movie. It was that all we have is this moment right now, and that's all that's important.
It was there are no ordinary moments. There are no ordinary. You remember, because in the movie, he has to go sit on the car until he can come up with something that's authentic and good. And he's like, everybody needs love. And no, that's
cliches.
Not it. Yeah, cliches.
All he can come up with is cliches.
And he even kind of does this comical thing, like, well, when you're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you apply the peanut butter first. And back to the thing. And finally, he has that realization, you know what, there are no ordinary moments. And one of the ways that whole living in the moment right now and experiencing it, that in the movie that he does, is Socrates throws him over a bridge into the water. That was a pretty dramatic moment.
Yes, I do recall that one. Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I recall that moment of being like, because he did not know how deep the water was. It was a stream, but he didn't know that at the time. And he goes, "How did you know it was just a stream?" I didn't.
I know.
I didn't.
Threw him over. One of the things that was different in the movie than in the book is that Dan's friends play a bigger part in the movie than they do in the book.
Yes. There's way more collegiate drama in this movie than the others. Yes,
for sure.
Right down to the end, that last scene where he's just chatting with his friend right before he goes up, and his friend is just blabbing his anxieties at him.
Yeah.
Again, almost as if we weren't paying attention for the first hour, 20 minutes of the movie. But yeah, they do play a bigger role for good or bad because in both cases, I feel they're superfluous. It's
Yeah.
really his hero's journey.
Yeah.
It's nice to have friends, but in the end, it's you.
Right.
You're
Right.
the only one you answer
Well,
to.
I think that the challenge there is that I think the challenge there is that uh, you know it brings out his like desire, you know what I mean, to do the pommel horse, to do the other stuff where, I think it brings out his, I don't know, competitive side that he has to kind of work on
I can see
in the
that
movie,
in the
like
movie. Yes,
he's got this competitive side that he kind of needs to give up.
you need that catalyst. You need
Yeah.
things to play off of. I can see
Right.
that because
And
again, it was a Hollywood movie.
yeah.
The novel wasn't a Hollywood book, but the movie was a Hollywood movie. So he
Right.
had to have that certain parameters we've come to expect. I can see that.
And I think too, the end kind of opens up the door for him to be a mentor himself, because that kid who, who says, Dan, you did something we all didn't think you were going to be able to do. And I guess that's an element that's true. I mean, he literally broke and shattered his leg, and no one thought he was going to be able to do gymnastics again. And not only does he do gymnastics, but he goes off and goes to the Olympics. I think anyway. I don't know if he really went to the Olympics. In the book, he goes to the Olympics. Does it?
I believe he does. I believe he actually does. Yeah.
Somebody
Dan
have to
Millman
look
did
that up. I mean, as being a big fan of Dan Millman as I am, you think that's probably something I knew at one time, but I don't know. I don't remember now. Kind of a thing.
As I get older, that happens to me more and more.
Mhm.
I relearn facts and stories and anecdotes, and I'll say to myself, I must have known that at one point. There's no
Yeah.
way I just learned this now. I've been a fan of this person or this thing for years. I couldn't just be learning that. I must have known it when I was in high school and forgotten it at some point over the years. So
Right.
trust me, I understand whereof you speak.
Yeah. 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 Well, what else? Is there any other comparisons or contrasts you want to make between the book and the movie?
No, I think
Was there something you wish they would have put in the movie that they didn't, that was in the book?
I think we've touched upon all of them. I think we touched about. I thought while Nick Nolte certainly gave the character some oomph, I
Mhm.
thought the film version of Socrates was not nearly as dynamic as the
Mm,
book version of Socrates. And
right.
I wish they could have expanded his character without detracting from the story. I wish you could have seen more as his, maybe not even necessarily his mysticism, although I did like that angle in the book,
Hmm.
but just his abilities. The only real scene we have of him that I thought really had any depth to it was when they go on that big long hike, and he just gives him a rock.
Yeah.
And says it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. I thought that was kind of slick, but again, that's only one small facet in a whole book of really cool Socrates examples. So I
Yeah.
just wish there'd been more of that.
Well, cool. I think we've kind of exhausted, probably didn't exhaust it, but we probably exhausted the differences between the book and the movie. Um, at least anything that I can think of that's of any relevance at all. But what one do you want to do next? Or any closing thoughts?
Well, one thing, because we always got to do the book versus movie, and usually people can kind of tell where we stand before we even say it. But I feel we at least
Oh
need to
yeah,
observe the. We have to
yes,
observe the
the tradition.
the tradition. Thank you. Yes. So
Yes,
I'm going to jump the gun and say in book. I have to
book,
go with the book in this case. Yes.
book. Yeah. I will say book too. I honestly, I can't decide. The only problem that I'm going to have with the movie, I think the movie's a great movie, though. I
Oh
don't
yes.
think I don't think that's a bad movie. The only problem with the movie is, like all movies, it's going to suffer. Even now, watching it now, when it came out in like 2003 or 2006, you can kind of see how it kind of gets old. and it's supposed to be a modern rendition of it. I loved the movie. I thought the movie was pretty much about as faithful to the spirit of the book as you can get and be a movie. Um, as I've said before, you can't just film a movie. Nobody would watch it. People would be bored to tears. It'd be 7 hours long, even on a short book, and people would just walk out. So I think it's a great movie. It's an A movie, but just because I've been a fan of the book for so long, I am going to be a fan of the book way until the movie is antiquated and they do a reboot of the movie, later or whatever.
Gotcha. So excellent.
Those are my thoughts. What do you want to do next as far as book versus movie? What are some ideas?
Well, I know you want to keep it Gen X as much as possible. That is to say, either the book or the movie, preferably both, have to have been from at least approximately our generation. That leaves All Quiet on the Western Front out, unless you want to do the Richard Thomas version, which leads me to my next point. I was wondering, because remember when we covered Dune, we did the book and both versions of the movie, not in this podcast format, but in our live stream not too long ago. And I thought that was actually pretty slick when you can actually compare a book to more than one movie. And I was wondering where you would stand on maybe doing War of the Worlds. Do the book by H.G. Wells and then do both adaptations of the film, the one from the 50s and the one from
I didn't see the 50s one.
I'm sure you could find it. Yeah. But something like that. That's just one suggestion. We could do that with All Quiet on the Western Front and do the 1930s film and the 1980 film.
Well, that one's got an 80s film.
Oh yeah, 1980 with Richard Thomas from, I'm getting his name wrong. No, from John Boy from the Waltons.
No. Let's do that one. Let's look into that one.
Sold. You got it. We'll do All Quiet on the Western Front, my favorite novel of all time.
All right. Well, if it's your favorite novel and there's an 80s movie, well, we got to do it.
Excellent. Super. So let's do that. Excellent.
All right, my friend. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Retro Serial. If you want to support the program, please head on over to our Patreon page where you'll find two levels of support. There is the Cornflake Club, which is $3 a month, and there is the Honeycomb Hideout, which is $5 a month, and we really appreciate all your help. Also, go to our YouTube page. We both have a YouTube page. I have a Retro Serial YouTube page, and Thrash Pondo Ponds has a YouTube page. And both of those will be linked in the comment section below, along with a link to the Retro Serial. And just so you know, too, if you're listening to this on podcast form, please give me a review and a rating. But we do have a YouTube page in which there's more over on the YouTube page, stuff that's more about, more stuff that you can see, more YouTube friendly. But wherever you're listening, I'm glad you're listening, and take care and stay retro until we meet again.